Happy New Year. You're welcome to the maiden edition of our webinar series for the year 2022. I am Professor Marie Baka, and I'll be your host, actually your moderator for today. Your usual moderator, Miss Nana Efua Roxon, has to be away to attend to some urgent issues. I promise I'll try to do my best today in her stead for us to have an exciting webinar today. Now, for the benefit of those joining us for the first time, let me introduce who we are and what we do at IEPA. The Institute for Educational Planning and Administration was established in August 1975, based on a joint agreement between the government of Ghana and UNESCO UNDP to build and strengthen capacity in educational planning and administration of experts and non-experts, and to inform educational policy formulation and implementation through research. And this has been the core of the Institute for 46 years and counting. In November 2020, IEPA officially became a UNESCO Category 2 Center of Excellence for West Africa. And this was launched by the Honorable Minister of Education in June 2021. As a UNESCO Category 2 Center, IEPA is to, among other things, build capacity of the workforce in the education sector in the West African sub-region and in the areas of educational planning, leadership, and administration, as well as mobilize international and regional experts to provide technical assistance and policy advice to support sector-wide planning and policy development. This webinar series is one of such events to build capacity geared towards the SDG 4, and I entreat all to visit the IEPA website, www.IEPA.ucc.edu.gh, to learn more about us. Today, we have two Fulbright Scholars from the United States of America, currently with IEPA, to take us through the webinar topic. They are Professor Candace M and Dr. Jillian A. Before I introduce them by reading their rich profiles, let me tell you how the presentation will go. First of all, Dr. Mo will take us through the subtopic, the influence of critical hybridity on collaborations between a US and Ghanaian higher education institution. She will share her perspectives on and experiences with developing and maintaining global collaborations using critical hybridity as a framework, specifically using her sustained partnership between the Institute for Educational Planning and Administration in University of Cape Coast and the University of Maryland as a case for employing a blended approach in global collaborations that include elements of coloniality and indigeneity. After that, Dr. Martin will also take us through the subtopic from, through, and to, a framework for contextualization of assessment or evaluation in the Ghanaian educational context. She will present considerations for contextualizing assessment or evaluation in Ghanaian higher education. She will discuss the history and background of assessment and evaluation through the lenses of coloniality, and she will draw on her research and practice experiences in Ghanaian higher education to use critical hybridity to reframe assessment and evaluation for Ghanaian context. Let's brace ourselves for an impactful discussion. And just before now, I'm told they'll be doing a blended presentation. So it wouldn't be a separate presentation, but they'll come in as and when. Participants, I believe we had read the study on Poloma Szelényi, 2019, on coloniality of knowledge, hybridization, and indigenous survival, exploring transnational higher education development in Africa from the 1920s to the 1960s. The link was shared through our registration confirmation email. So this will inform the basis of our webinar today. So during the presentations, if you have questions or comments, kindly type them in the chat column, and we'll read and address them during the question and answer session. We will expect that you indicate who should respond to the question, whether it's Professor Moore or Dr. Martin, or whether it goes to the two ladies. And please, as we type our questions, if you want to, in the chat session, we should also try to indicate who should respond to this. So without much ado, let me introduce Professor Moore and Dr. Martin. So, profile of Professor Candace Moore. Professor Moore is a Fulbright US scholar with the IEPA-UCC in Cape Coast, Ghana, for the 2021-2022 academic year. She serves as an associate clinical professor in the higher education, student affairs, and international education policy program at the University of Maryland in College Park, Maryland, USA. She is promoting inclusive campus environments and fostering international collaboration in higher education. Key focus is understanding Black and LGBTQ student identities, contingent faculty development in higher education, cultural conscious pedagogy and practices, and tertiary education in Ghana. She has also developed a hybrid international graduate level global classroom with colleagues from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana and Washington University, St. Louis, Missouri. Great. Now we'll have the profile of Dr. Jillian Dr. Jillian Martin, sorry. Dr. Martin is a Fulbright US scholar with the Institute for Educational Planning and Administration at the University of Cape Coast. She focuses her scholar practice on creating opportunities for the use of inquiry, being assessment, evaluation, and research in intentional educational practice. She has previously served as an administrator in higher education, working in the functional areas of assessment, evaluation, civic community engagement, residence life, student activity, and diversity inclusion. Her research interests include student support services in Ghanaian higher education, gifted Black girls and women in education, visual methods in educational research, cultural critical epistemologies, and qualitative research methodologies. Participants, your resource persons, thank you. Professor Moore and Dr. Martin, you have the platform now. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. Baca. We really appreciate your warm welcome and certainly your friendship and colleagueship. Good afternoon, good day to everyone. It is a pleasure to join you for this IEPA webinar series. Thank you to our colleagues in IEPA for the invitation to join you today. I'd also like to acknowledge my first teachers, my parents and ancestors who have informed the lessons that I hold so dear. I am currently joining you from present-day Accra, Ghana, in West Africa, where I'm serving on my Fulbright appointment as a US scholar with IEPA at the University of Cape Coast. I like to acknowledge the ancestral land of the God Dungbeg people of Accra, Ghana, and the Fanti people of Cape Coast, Elmina, Ghana. As a member of the faculty of the University of Maryland in present-day College Park, Maryland, I like to acknowledge the stolen lands from the indigenous communities of the Piscataway people in Maryland. I give honor and pay respect to the lands where the knowledge and labor that informs this scholarship took place. I also acknowledge and bear witness to the enslaved labor and stolen identities of our African diasporic ancestors who sacrificed their bodies and blood across the so-called United Land. Their labor and their living shall not be in vain. Before we move forward with our remarks on the impacts of coloniality, indigeneity, and critical hybridity on African higher education, with an emphasis on global learning, I need to place myself, as Dr. Lee Patel calls on decolonizing scholars to do, I need to place myself in relation to the communities for which I partner and study with. My perspective is informed through African indigenous knowledge. More specifically, for the purposes of this talk, our comments and scholarship are in relation to Ghanaian indigeneity. Dr. George Sefade describes African indigeneity as a powerful decolonial stance to investigate the possibilities of African indigenous knowledge. This stance demands a continuing questioning of the universality of Western science through anti-colonial and decolonial prisms. He goes on to assert the importance of community elders are connected to local knowledge that informs knowledge truths and epistemologies. So for today's discussion, we are centering African indigeneity as our lens for decolonial work. I'll ask my colleague, Dr. Martin, to level set our conversation for today by illuminating the main points from the framework of coloniality, indigeneity, and critical hybridity, as detailed by Poloma and Szelényi, who we're using their work to guide our remarks today. Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, and I'd like to thank IEPA, the Director General, the Honorable Director General, Dr. Michael Boetche-Yadem, Nana Efua Roxon, and Professor Baka for the generous introduction. And I'm so excited to talk with you all today from this perspective with my colleague, Dr. Moore. So I began talking about these three concepts, coloniality, critical hybridity, and indigeneity, with what I hope is a shared experience. Have you ever had a knot in a pair of headphones or in a thread that seemed impossible to get out? I just had one myself as I was coming on. And you get so frustrated by the knot that you just begin to shake it around, hoping that the knot will disentangle itself. But in reality, it gets even more tangled. So what do? I'm reminded of the many times I've just handed knots to my mother, and I saw her disentangle the knot string by string, section by section. So as we're thinking about decolonization and coloniality today, that's what we're doing. We are disentangling it bit by bit in our relearning everything we've been taught about education and learning and growth and development. If you read today, this is the beginning of this disentangling by understanding what Poloma Szelényi their work about coloniality of knowledge, hybridization, and indigenous knowledge survival, and how that serves as a frame for understanding higher education in the liberation context of Ghana. While our focus is on Ghana, the article also does some work in disentangling this for Nigeria, showing the interconnectedness of West Africa to colonization. And then also we're able to draw some parallels to apartheid and post-apartheid in South Africa. Coloniality becomes a thread that we can follow to untangle ourselves from what we know or what we assume that we know about the African continent and its educational systems, and understand how things are interconnected globally. There are still remnants of colonization that exist as we begin to disentangle. And I want to start first by talking about the US coloniality of knowledge. So in the article for today, their work gives us a good way to begin to process this and to understand these three concepts: US coloniality of knowledge, hybridity, the critical hybridity, and then indigeneity. In the US coloniality of knowledge, we have almost a global universal adoption of the US way of education through grading systems, faculty hiring and promotion, courses and curriculum, and residential and administrative practices. The coloniality of knowledge is undergirded by assumptions of US faculty and administrators that are embedded in neo-imperialist notions. If you have not read Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism by Kwame Nkrumah, it is a very good read about the view of colonization from the perspective of the newly liberated Ghana. And it represents how the US and other places in the West have in effect hidden their empires through globalization and cornering what we are commonly calling the knowledge economy market. In order to keep up, and I'm supposed to have quotation there, keep up, countries like Ghana and Nigeria, as mentioned in the article, have begun to incorporate what I call a copy-paste method of educational policy. That is, there's a copying of what the US or West context is doing because of the preponderance of their they're being larger, bigger, knowing more than the rest of the world, and then in a direct pace into incorporating it into the practices within these contexts. Now, some educators and administrators, and I've had a pleasure of meeting and working with them while here on Fulbright, they've gone a little bit farther in their attempts to adapt curriculum, ensure educational access, and adopt institutional values and practices related to local and national development needs in a critical hybridity space. They adopt and adapt the principles, policies of education in the US West directly to their cultural context. The article talks about the leadership of as a way of Nigeria and Nkrumah of Ghana as being important to this, to ensuring critical hybridity. Finally, in indigeneity, countries adopt a liberation consciousness where there's an intentional integration of indigenous values, culture, and history across the curriculum and into the administrative practices. What this looks like is the hiring and inclusion of indigenous faculty to train in decolonizing methodologies and pedagogies. In this critical move, the authors show how important leadership and national agenda setting is in educational settings, specifically in higher education, to move away from the US West just way of doing things and adapting into indigeneity through cultural hybridity. As pictured, there are multiple ways to disentangle, but to keep disentangling, we need tools or devices like these leather earphone holders to help us do so. Dr. Moore and I will present today on how we have gone about this in our own work and hope to inspire more action towards critical hybridity and indigeneity within the higher education, tertiary educational context. I'll pass now back to Dr. Moore to talk about sustainable collaborations. Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. She is such a phenomenal teacher. I'm so fortunate and blessed to work with her. Thank you. As educators and scholars, we have a responsibility to disrupt coloniality in our work domestically and abroad. My remarks will focus on the impact of coloniality, indigeneity, and critical hybridity, specifically on African higher education through sustainable collaborations. My experiences with the framework are in global learning, and they've taken me on a professional and personal journey, with me reflecting on reimagining global learning every step of the way. In the traditions of my own upbringing, given to me by my ancestors and through Ghanaian indigeneity, I'll continue with my remarks using storytelling and uplifting Ghanaian proverbs through my narrative. You cannot expect the unconventional by employing conventional measures. As educators, we should enact transformational practices and pedagogies. Often in higher education, we highlight that theory informs practice. I offer that that view is far too narrow. I'm not disregarding the viewpoint, rather imploring you to consider an unconventional approach. African higher education is thirsting for innovation, and that innovation comes from an old friend, rather local, indigenous knowledge. As we promote innovative research methods and student affairs practice, we should engage more intently with local communities and incorporate those indigenous knowledges into our research and our practice, ultimately rewriting the textbooks on employing rigorous approaches and promoting unconventional scholarship and practice. We have an opportunity to empower faculty, administrators, graduate students, and advance the communities we serve through African indigeneity as a decolonizing approach to research and practice. Our graduate faculty and students must transform our theory development by relying more directly on locally informed practices. So simply put, we must enact the unconventional. My journey in African higher education includes co-developing a short-term study abroad program called Higher Education in the Ghanaian Context, or affectionately referred to as HEGC, at the University of Maryland. My colleague, Dr. Jillian Martin, collaborated with me on the program, and it highlights Ghanaian higher education and focuses on decentering whiteness and Western-informed approaches to student affairs practice. We diligently work to contextualize higher education practices in the Ghanaian context with this program that targets graduate students from across the US, higher education professionals, as well as faculty, with the hopes of preparing them as educators who are actively and culturally conscious participants in global learning, global scholarship, and global pedagogies. My engagement with our program highlights for me the importance of hosting education abroad programs in Africa and the influences of study abroad education on graduate students. And I'll note the immeasurable impact that these types of experiences for people who have ancestral connections to the African diaspora are truly invaluable. From the study abroad program over the years, students have used their newly gained cultural conscious knowledge to inform their practice, their research, and truly their own personal lives. So it goes without saying that study abroad education has regenerative legacies for those who engage in this type of learning. During our program, we visit cultural sites in Accra, where while we're there, we also visit the University of Ghana Legon and Ashesi University, where we learn about student service practices in the Ghanaian context. While in Accra, we're also able to meet with the Ministry of Education and discuss what we're learning through our experiences in country, really in a broader context. Also, our journey takes us to Kumasi, where we engage with local economies, esteemed lecturers and historians, and we practice cultural traditions like Adinkra stamping and Kente weaving. We also engage with members of the faculty at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, an eye-opening exposure to Ghanaian art and art history. We finally journey to the Central region and immerse ourselves in historically and truly spiritual spaces like Asin Manso, Elmina, and Cape Coast. We engage with our learning partners in IEPA at the University of Cape Coast, allowing our students to participate in a learning colloquium with faculty, graduate students, and student services professionals regarding pressing issues and solution-focused practice in the Ghanaian higher education context. The Ghanaian proverb, which notes that the rain wets the leopard's spots, but does not wash them off, meaning you can't change a person's true character, regardless of how hard you try, comes to mind for me as a reminder to not, I repeat, not enter global spaces, holding expectations from the global north and setting up transactional experiences with global partners that reinforce colonial harms and trauma on communities. Our program uses project-based learning as the avenue to collaboratively engage with our Ghanaian higher education partners on project ideas that are truly generated by those partners. While decentering whiteness in global education spaces is important, my journey in global learning has awakened new lessons for me regarding the centrality of African, local, and indigenous knowledges. So then the question bears, what does decolonizing global learning mean for me and my scholarship and my pedagogy? Through a seed grant offered by the Office of International Affairs at the University of Maryland, I partnered with my colleague, the esteemed Dr. Michael Boakye-Yadam, and now the Director General of IEPA at the University of Cape Coast, to collaboratively bridge two courses from our higher education and student affairs graduate programs into a virtual classroom. Now, occasionally, Dr. Martin would join us as a guest lecturer while juggling her role as a campus administrator, and we truly appreciated her time when she had it. The course was initially designed to serve as a cross-cultural learning opportunity for our master's level students using a project-based learning approach. However, over the 3 years of teaching the course, we shifted the curriculum to reflect on centering African indigenous knowledge, while also exploring theories and practices that are informed through Western ideologies. You see, we acknowledge that both our American-based and Ghanaian-based students wanted to learn about multiple ways of knowing and a variety of practical and educational approaches to learning. So I guess you can say we employed as a guide for the course curriculum what is referred to as critical hybridity, particularly noting it as a framework for examining how transnational interactions between global North and global South shape higher education development. As illustrated in the Ghanaian proverb, if someone starts beating the edge of a drum, he, she, they will play it sooner. The proverb encourages one to start something and move gradually while being determined in facing life's challenges. During a global classroom session, a graduate student posed a question that intrigued me. She asked, where do we as graduate students and practitioners get the space to imagine decolonizing approaches and explore multiple ways of knowing? Her question has inspired my next point. As faculty, we should use our pedagogy to foster spaces which support flourishing imaginations. Our graduate students and our practitioners are really forging pathways to newly designed and sustainable approaches to scholarship and practice. As faculty and as administrators, we have a duty to nurture their imaginations. You see, as a direct outcome of being in the midst of their imaginations, we as seasoned faculty and administrators get a chance to view the world differently. That's honestly a blessing. Our classrooms, both formal and informal, have the potential of squashing innovation by relying solely on traditional, or should I say, typically colonial informed methods of teaching. Yet, we also have the potential of fostering educational environments that engage graduate students and practitioners and exploring their creativity, challenging previously used approaches, and empowering them to craft new theory and new practices. Our classrooms and our fieldwork are those spaces for graduate students and practitioners to imagine decolonizing approaches and uncover multiple ways of knowing. And as educators, we should foster those spaces. We should be open to the uncertainty of knowing and employing transformational pedagogies. An important element of my approach to exploring critical hybridity has highlighted for me the significance of maintaining sustainable partnerships and elevating the voices of international partners and graduate students. Our collaborations have allowed us to include African higher education professional associations like the Association of African Universities, where partnering with them has been really invaluable in our work. My collaborators and I continue to elevate voices through, well, pre-COVID, in-person annual colloquia on pressing issues in the Ghanaian higher education context that engage participants from the study abroad program with higher ed colleagues in Ghana. Also through our annual virtual international symposia, which is a culminating event of the study abroad program, allowing participants and global partners to share their knowledge gained through their experience in Ghana with others. And through the incredibly successful Student Innovation Research Expo, which is hosted annually by IEPA in Cape Coast, Ghana, allowing emerging scholars from across the country to share their scholarship. Engaging in scholarship from manuscript writing, blog posts, report development, grant proposals, presenting academic papers, both on the national and international level with graduate students and global faculty, are just a few of the ways in which my colleagues and I sustain our partnerships. Particularly, having the opportunity to publish in academic journals in Ghana has been a rewarding experience for the graduate students, my global partners, and me. The Ghanaian proverb, knowledge is like a baobab tree. No one can encompass it with their hands, reminds us that human wisdom is so great, and it would be audacious and almost egotistical to believe that one can claim to have mastered it all. My US Fulbright appointment with IEPA at the University of Cape Coast has involved truly a spiritual immersion and connection to engaging in learning from a healing epistemology that allows for me to explore the complex implications of coloniality on global education while centering African indigenous knowledge. My scholarship here in Ghana uses participatory action research to include the voices of local community elders, faculty, graduate students, and higher ed professionals here in Ghana, forming an amazing research team of talented individuals. Our research team is collectively expanding on the work of Dr. George Sefade and really wanting to learn more about the cultural and traditional knowledge, truths, and epistemologies that have been applied during COVID-19 to support student development and student success in college. As always, I like to publicly thank and acknowledge my fellow research team members. I appreciate your scholarship. Our research, our scholarship, our teaching would be nothing without the communities we exist in. The success and the impact of our scholarship and practice are dependent on our sustainable collaborations with communities nationally and internationally. I leave you with this. How can you employ critical hybridity in developing or sustaining your collaborations? I offer these hints to help you address the original question. How can you engage with African indigeneity in ways that are not exploitative? What communities will your work serve? Are you overlooking missed opportunities? And truly, what can or will you rekindle? I hope that these questions offer to you some insight as you explore sustaining collaborations in your own work. Thank you for your time and consideration given to my comments today. I now transition to Dr. Martin for her comments and her instructions.
As always, thank you, Dr. Moore. I feel like I learned so much from you and through you in our work together here. I'm going to talk today from a similar perspective of Dr. Moore, but really centering inquiry, assessment, evaluation, and research in the Ghanaian context, and offer some questions similar to Dr. Moore for us to think about, and what I'm thinking about for my Fulbright appointment around how we create frameworks for this work in Ghanaian higher education from an Indigenous perspective. So if you know me, you know I love Adinkra symbols. And I love them not only for the symbols themselves are beautiful and they're seen all around Ghana, but I also love them for the proverbial parts of the symbols. It's something that a symbol can both represent words and also concepts pretty quickly, which I love. So I'll use these symbols throughout. I thank my colleagues for helping me as I learn how to pronounce them correctly. If I mess up, I'm very open to corrections and do not mean any disrespect as I'm still learning through this process myself. So I'll talk briefly about the history, purposes, and usage of inquiry in US higher education. Then I'll shift to talk about how we use inquiry in the HEGC program as a case for critical hybridity. I'll talk through some possibilities and strategies for inquiry in Ghanaian higher education. And then I'll do a call to action about inquiry in this context. So inquiry is one of my favorite words. I like the way it's spelled. I like the fact that it has a Q and a U in it. Not many words have that in the English language. But I'm going to be talking today about inquiry as a function of coloniality, critical hybridity, and indigeneity. So from coloniality through critical hybridity into indigeneity. I've learned over time as a good academic, we must
Oh, okay. We last saw Dr. Jillian. Just lost her, but hoping she'll come back soon. So participants, let's keep taking notes and putting down our questions and contributions. The chat session is there, and we're looking forward to having Dr. Martin back soon. Welcome back, Dr. Martin. Yeah.
All right, back again. It may do that one more time. Sorry, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay, great. So I invite in the chat your own concept of inquiry. When you hear the word inquiry, what comes to mind? When I Googled it, it's the act of asking for information or an official investigation. So the inquiry is being curious about some phenomena, and then investigating that phenomena. Next slide. One of my favorite quotes around inquiry within the context of higher education actually comes from the Journal for Student Affairs Inquiry within the context of the United States. It says inquiry involves reflective and reflexive efforts to address universal and local context of assessment, evaluation, and research. This quote is about student affairs within higher education, but I think offers us a way to think about inquiry as something we reflect upon and then actually practice and then reflect again in a continuous cycle. Inquiry represents an effort to transcend strict divisions of assessment, evaluation, and research. In the context of this discussion, I'll be using inquiry to mean the interplay between these three tools we use in higher education and education broadly to determine how effective we are. These tools are research, assessment, and evaluation. I'll place a link in the chat with the articles for your review as I talk through assessment in this regard. Next slide. One of my favorite Adinkra symbols is this one, Nia Onim Nosia Ahu. It is, in other words, he or she who does not know can know from learning or teaching. Learning is lifelong and does not end. Inquiry is a way to continue learning about yourself and your practice as educators. When reformulated this way, inquiry becomes a way to use the tools of assessment, evaluation, and research to better understand and put into practice methods to provide a better education to students and to become better faculty and administrators. Next slide. Within coloniality is where we find inquiry's origins. Through coloniality, inquiry has to have a purpose, a utility, something that feeds into another. So within the context of higher education, research, assessment, and evaluation have been used to create and maintain global systems that benefit and uphold the United States and in general the West as the holders of the knowledge economy. The dates here, as you can see, bleed into each other. It shows how we make meaning of our effectiveness in higher education. It's tied to our context and the current political situations in which we position ourselves. This timeline of history of inquiry is drawn from Ewell and Cumming that parallels what was happening in education and in the United States at this time. This idea of inquiry began really as hypothesis testing and theory building based on either participants that were mostly white, male, cisgender, upper class, Christian, and able-bodied, or were based on the experiences and assumptions of faculty and administrators working with these students at that time. From this place led to synthesis of the information and of the research being done on students that hope to show what the net effects of higher education are and to demonstrate to society what the return of higher education, the return of investment of higher education for its students. From this initial phase, theoretical models of student success, as well as concerns on retention and attrition, began to be centered. The central questions were about how students move through college, their development, and how that can help in the creation of methods to retain students and prevent them from leaving. This is also where the concept of action research connected to assessment movements, how we can determine effectiveness by utilizing research tools and lead to transformative outcomes for students and faculty and administrators within higher education. At the same time, however, program evaluation, which has around it an improvement ethos, how do we improve, became a mechanism for higher education administrators and faculty to manage the systems of higher education and in effect create efficiencies. This is tied directly, of course, to capitalism and the want to have as much for as little as possible. Program evaluation is based upon an input-output model, usually determining what outcomes or things you want to see, and then mapping them backwards with using logic models. Similarly, these ways connected higher education to be a way to judge the mastery of learning, to justify the higher income of graduates versus the non-college going population. While it is still taking hold, we're finding ways beyond the quantitative and hypothesis testing, or in addition to measure competency-based learning and authentic and demonstrated learning to show that learning is occurring rather than just a kind of show it, just a tell through the self-report of students. I use Sankofa intentionally as we talk about inquiry and coloniality. It's important to go back and understand so that we can create new ways or innovative ways, like Dr. Moore was talking about, of being, rather than just reifying and copying and pasting old ways. The adage here goes, every round goes higher and higher. And so in my work in Ghana, I ask, how can Ghana continue to build upon the foundation of the inquiry and go higher and higher as it seeks to support these students? So I invite you in the chat to share, what are some of the methods, approaches, and/or practices of inquiry that you've adapted from the US or other Western countries? What do you admire about those methods? And where do those methods fall short in your context? Next slide. There are many models for how higher inquiry can be done in higher education. This is one that I'm starting to use as it incorporates all the elements of inquiry, assessment, evaluation, and research, as well as creating a feedback loop to enhance evaluative thinking. It is iterative, as you can see. It's based on change, which can be measured, and it is cyclical. I wish I could take credit for this beautiful model, but this comes from Illuma Lab in St. Louis, Missouri, where I work with on a project and thinking about how we can create new ways of understanding how we are creating change through educational systems. Next slide. Dr. Moore has already given you an overview of HEGC, which is possibly the highlight of my career. Critical hybridity is a really interesting process of contextualizing epistemologies or ways of knowing, ontologies or reality, axiologies or values, and practices between cultures. It's what we sought to do with the HEGC program. We wanted to demonstrate how Ghana could teach us about higher education, much in the way that we anticipate or assume that the US could teach the world about higher education. That is, we intentionally sought out other ways of knowing and being outside of, but impacted by Western influences to guide students to think about higher education in different ways. Further, we sought to reimagine learning that centered students in the cultural context, rather than reproducing old ways of knowing or hegemonic ways of being and learning that centered whiteness and forced other ways of knowing to be deemed second class or inferior. Similarly, how we engaged in inquiry was culturally conscious as well. We leaned on 3 concepts from Ghanaian Adinkra symbols to frame how we taught, how we learned with, and ultimately assessed the program participants. These were Sankofa, where students wrote reflections prior, during, and after the trip, so we can see how their learning transformed over time. Futumfunemfu, Dichimfunefu, my colleague is helping me still. The use of collaborative project-based learning that Dr. Moore discussed, where participants will learn together and from each other, given what they were learning about a different context. And my favorite, Nia Onim Oshia A Ohu. Thank you, Auntie, which I have alluded to earlier, where our big questions and outcomes for the class are tied to how participants incorporate their learning into their scholarship, into their practice and scholarship. In the chat, I welcome your comments. What are practices inside or outside Ghana related to inquiry that you think could be contextualized for inside or outside of Ghana? That is, what are practices that could be used to inform and be contextualized for your particular context? Next slide, please. I will now outline some considerations for the integration of indigeneity as a strategy for inquiry in higher education. First, what are you curious about in your own practice or scholarship? What interests you? What things that you do that you want to know of whether or not it's effective? How are you thinking about how what that thing you're curious about impacts your students, but also impacts you as a faculty or administrator? Second, what are the local practices, policies, and or ways of knowing that already exist about that phenomenon? Consider the world around you, the market, the traffic, the everyday ways that we ask ourselves and make determination about how the world works. How is it working on an everyday basis? Number three, how can these practices or ways of knowing be used as a foundation rather than relying on Western ways of knowing and being and values that warp the reality here into a deficit frame? How do we incorporate these ways of knowing as we begin to think about how effective our practices are? And then finally, how can this inquiry project that you're dreaming of inform future inquiry projects for yourself and for your colleagues? I often find that once we find whether or not something is effective, we may move on to other things. But my work here as a Fulbright Scholar is to think about the ways that inquiry projects could build upon each other and form a basis of scholarship of higher education practice here in Ghana. Next slide, please. I will conclude with a call to action. Over my now almost 7 years of coming to Ghana, I've seen so many incredible possibilities for inquiry and practice in higher education. This can exist on multiple levels and can also help us to think and frame about how we consider the success of students in tertiary education in Ghana. Rather than looking at the Ghanaian culture from a deficit frame, how might we reframe and look to local practices and scholarship, much like what Dr. Moore is doing in her research to form the basis or the foundation of how we educate and think about students. I'm now going to pass to Professor Baka for our question and answer. Thank you all for your time, attention, and patience with my connection.
Oh, great. How interesting. We really are grateful, Professor Moore and Dr. Martin, for such an insightful presentation. I am hopeful that participants have some questions and comments. But before then, I have some few comments to make. Indeed, I'm elated to hear you have a blend of, African proverbs and Adinkra symbols embedded in your presentations. And to me, it's a big challenge and have been challenged. And it applies to me as well. Indeed, indigeneity is key. Coloniality, we need to be awakened even as faculty in this 21st century to bring in that blend to be able to have a holistic, candidates that we teach, so that indeed global learning will also be part of what we do. Actually, the conventional attitude of training our students, that does not grow them, globally, and having that awareness of their, society and indigent is not encouraging enough. Hopefully, innovative research need to be encouraged that will incorporate, what our societies are entailed of, what our indigenous do, and then the practice. I was really excited to see the various pictures in those slides that really proved that you were within our context and had that detailed interaction with faculty, with students in the Ghanaian context and elsewhere. Hopefully, participants, if you have questions, you may raise up your hand in the chat session, and then as well type in your questions if you want to. However, since we have some time, I'll throw us back to Professor Moore to give us the questions for the breakout session.
It looks like we have a question from Akwesi Sarpong.
Yeah. Akwesi Sarpong says, I echo Dr. and insightful examples for scaling up indigenous knowledge into higher education and collaborating with communities. Superb. Is sending us some compliments. Haven't seen this question yet. Yeah. Oh. So we'll keep looking out for the questions from participants. I hand you over to.
Hello?
Hello. Yes. Akwesi, please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm very grateful for this webinar. I believe more of this needs to be done, and the recording should be shared widely beyond just the university, but with organizations, NGOs, and private sector to change that paradigm shift that we're looking for. My question, two. I would like to know what has been the, particularly those that return to Ghana in this process of collaboration and the use of the local languages. For example, a student go to study in a higher institution in a particular community. He might not even be able to speak that language of it. What has been the role from this model that has been used by the scholars here? I'll be very grateful to know the inclusion of the general issue of Africa and the use of our local languages for students who move from one community to the other as they interact with communities that they study with. What has been the impact? Thank you.
Thank you for your question and for your kind words. I'll speak from my perspective and then pass to Dr. Moore if she has something to add. But I think that that is a really critical juncture, if not the next juncture of us thinking about indigeneity, because then we begin to piece apart the different languages that are even privileged as far as local languages go in Ghana, and think about broadly how we need a multilingual or multi-dialect perspective in our work within communities. And I'll say that I've, as you heard me through, even though I practice, without that local context and that knowledge, I rely on my colleagues to help me in that regard, and find that in my own work that we may lose things in translation, even in how we're teaching students, lecturing to students, and then working with communities. So I'm grateful to my colleagues for the teaching that they do, but I feel that that is the thing that I think will be the next great thing that I learn in Ghana. Is about the language, and then how we then transition or contextualize language in the classroom as we're teaching students about education.
That was very helpful. And I'll just add a couple of minor comments, and they'll focus primarily on a approach that we are promoting in our own work. And that is with regard to using what we call culturally conscious practice and pedagogy in our approach to teaching, in scholarship, and also in practice. And in doing so, Dr. Borche and I had the pleasure of presenting together for our colleagues in IEPA teaching workshop, a training workshop, where we talked a little bit about the concepts of culturally conscious practice. And one of those being the value of having students not only write, but present their ideas in languages that they are most comfortable using. So that they are, to Dr. Martin's point, able to convey the true meaning and the efforts that they want to make sure people understand. Now, then of course, the method then asks for you to translate to English, and in that you do lose some of its meaning and some of its intentionality. And so I think that there are opportunities for us to continue to learn how we might be able to grow from an experience like that. And I see that DG is on the call, and maybe he might offer some insights as well.
Okay. So do we have any participants here who wants to make any contribution? Okay. All right. Our breakout sessions are ready. The rooms are all set, and we want Professor Moore to give us the breakout questions.
Thank you, Prof. Baca. I believe that Dr. Martin is about to start sharing her screen with the breakout questions that we are asking for people to explore in smaller conversations. You know, it's so great to be in the webinar, and there are so many amazing minds that are here, but we don't get to hear from them. And so we think it's a wonderful opportunity for people who are on the call as colleagues to be able to share and learn from one another. And so the questions that we would ask for you to explore are, in discussing the topic for today, what resonated with you? And what are you maybe interested in learning more about? Next, in your own practice and scholarship, what ways have you participated in sustainable collaborations, whether that be through practice or research or other opportunities in community? And then maybe what might be some of your experiences in inquiry projects? And in what ways would you like to participate in sustainable collaborations or inquiry projects? And then finally, really, how does coloniality, critical hybridity, and indigeneity show up in your own practice and scholarship? How would you like for these concepts to show up in your practice and your scholarship? So I believe that we'll be moving into the breakout rooms in just a moment. And in that, you'll be able to visit the chat feature where the questions have been posted so that you're able to review those during your discussion. Now, these questions were merely meant to get the conversation going. There might be other topics that come up for you in your breakout sessions. And so we look forward to hearing what you all discuss as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Moore. We are ready with our chat rooms, and we have our group leaders set. So we'll move us to our chat room.
Oh, hold on.
Are we being moved to the group out session, or we are already in a group out session group? I'm not sure. Mary, you are muted.
Yeah, we're in a group session right now, Dr. B.
Okay,
Yes, we are in our group.
Dr. Wachi, good morning.
So,
good morning, Dr. Wachi.
please,
How are you?
I'm good.
all right. So we have our questions in the chat session. And whilst we are doing our discussions, you can make reference to those questions in the chat session. I hope we are in our rooms now. 10 minutes to do this, please.
So our discussion, whoever has the questions.
I think Dr. Wachi, so we are adding you, please. Yes. Yes. Dr. Wachi, I've added you too.
So we just want to hear from you all about the presentation, what resonates with you, what do you want to learn more about? I've posted the questions in the chat. I don't know if people can see them.
Hello.
Hi, Sifam, how are you? Are there any comments or about what you heard today? Or even how you're thinking about the concepts we introduced in your practice? Hi, everyone. I've reposted the questions in the chat for your information as they didn't show up for some folks, so they're reposted for you there.
Yes. I hear Dr. Martin says she has posted some, but we are not seeing that. Since everybody is kind of busy,
I think so.
can we maybe send it to
Okay. Now, welcome back from your breakout sessions. So we are all back to the main platform. And it's now time to share our thoughts on the questions that came up from Professor Moore and Dr. Martin. So I'll hand over to Dr. Martin for her to interact with the participants concerning their thoughts on the questions, please. Dr.
Yes.
Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Baca. Thank you all so much for your patience as navigating the breakout rooms. Professor Braca did an expert of trying to add people into the breakout room. So thank you, Professor Baca. Would love to hear your thoughts of what came up in your breakout rooms. I was hearing some very interesting conversations in the breakout rooms I was in that was specifically about apprenticeship, can adapt apprenticeships and how we think about them in Ghana into our higher education spaces more specifically. And I also was hearing this concept of how policy implementation or practice implementation is directly related to who is doing the implementation rather than the policy and practices themselves, which is a very interesting, I think, concept around it. But I welcome for the next 2 to 3 minutes, just so what people discussed. You can either place it in the chat or raise your hand and share your comments with the breakout discussions and the presentation that Dr. Moore and I just shared.
Okay. Uh-oh. Am I on? Hello?
Go ahead, Doctor.
No, you are on.
So we were in breakout room 2. And then we had these questions to reflect on. What resonated with us? What do you want to learn more about? And the questions were, in our own practice scholarship, what ways have we participated in sustainable collaborations, in inquiry projects? In what ways would we like to participate in sustainable collaborations or inquiry projects? And then we thought it through, and we think that the Edinkra symbol used by Dr. Martin seemed to resonate with the symbol of IEPA, which says that Niaonim Esuya Ohunu literally means if anybody learns, he or she will know. So we see that as always resonating with learning from our own base, our own contexts. We pick it from there. And we also reflected, there is an adage in teaching that says that we learn from known to unknown. And then we also learn from concrete to abstract. So we must start, or we can begin with our own environment, our own peripherals, before we expand, so that we can appreciate sameness in our own peripherals elsewhere. And then we can also, seek to understand different contexts. So that is one. And then where we were thinking about how we would like to collaborate, sustain these collaborations. We think that we should have value for others, other people that we work with, in terms of research, in terms of teaching, and even in terms of outreach. This I know, and I believe are a core mandate of IEPA that we seek to do. And we think that for both students and for faculty and for other people elsewhere, which we seek to reach out to, we need to value what they are made of. They are in terms of knowledge, in terms of their expertise. and others. So if you value others, practices, others' experiences, others' expositions, then you also be valued too. And then that will even seek to improve the third question that came to mind. We even seek to improve the hybridity, that's the mixture that we're talking about. That going forward, then we know that we are very cultural, responsive in terms of dealing with other cultures, and not to sit in our own and then believe that that is our own best. And for others also to believe that that is their own best. In coloniality, the last thing that we thought through, we thought that, we came from somewhere, colonialism. And so some of the things that we do, even up to date, we pick it up from there. It has been with our forefathers up till now, and it's difficult to break, but we have to make that conscious effort to start from somewhere so that we can get somewhere too, and then we'll appreciate whatever we do as a people in one globe going forward. And so one other thought that was also shared, that we think that we can also research further, read more to have more information about other people, so we can appreciate ourselves well in all these academic components that we find ourselves doing. That is research, teaching, outreach work, and others related or relevant activities that we do. So that is group 2, what we thought, our reflections concerning some of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Afre. She actually is my colleague here in the office and was helping me with my pronunciation. So I thank her for being such a great colleague. With that, I'll pass to Dr. Moore to wrap us with some comments and then wrap our time together. Thank you all so much for your time and attention.
Indeed, Dr. Freya is truly a national treasure. I just want to say that while we have you for a moment, there may be members of our community who are interested in traveling to Ghana for an educational tour. In lieu of our traditional study abroad program that Dr. Martin and I offer, we will be able to offer a tour. We have partnered with a company, AD Couture Travel and Tour, for June 6th through the 18th of 2022. And we have included in the chat, I'll ask if Dr. Martin is able to post both links, one for more information about the program, and then second, if you're interested to register by April 4th. This program is open to anyone. And so it is obviously encouraging people from outside of Ghana to travel and come and learn more about Ghana. But in doing so, you'll also learn about education and be able to engage with education professionals here in country. For those who are interested in joining and are looking to gain academic credit, so if you're at an institution in the United States primarily and are interested in gaining independent study credit, please email me directly and we can have a conversation that might incorporate faculty on your own campus to make sure that you're able to attain that credit. Of course, it goes without saying that we are incredibly thankful for this opportunity to be with you here today. Our colleagues in IEPA are amazing and wonderful, and we're so thankful for them. Particularly, we want to thank Professor Baca, Ms. Afua Roxon, obviously our Director General, Dr. Boache Yadam, for the direct invitation to join you all today. And it goes without saying that we want to continue the conversation and continue engaging. So please do find ways to engage us as your time permits. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Moore and Dr. Martin. Matter of fact, we are glad you came here today to do this wonderful presentation. It was really insightful. And you can see from the contributions across that really this is a topic that we have to keep discussing as the years go along to be able to improve on our discourse regarding coloniality, indigeneity and collaborations across continents. Indeed, we also really loved your presentations that were laced with the pictures of your interactions with the higher education community in our context. And it was really exciting to see this. We are so grateful to have you, and wish you all the best. And we also want to thank all of us, those who took time to register and participate in this webinar. You all agree with me that our resource persons did justice to the topic, and we have really gained much insight. Thank you, Dr. Moore, again. Thank you, Professor Moore, and thank you, Dr. Martin. We really appreciate you. I'd like to say thank you to all participants from the University of Maryland in College Park, Maryland, USA, where Dr. Moore is, Professor Moore is a faculty member and also participant from the University of Missouri, USA, where Dr. Martin is a faculty member as well, for joining us today. Thank you so much. To all those who helped to put this webinar together, say thank you so much. The slides will be emailed to you in due course. And we are also compiling all the videos from our webinars. So we share on our YouTube page. So please watch out for such videos. Kindly send us an email at iep.ocr@ucc.edu.gh if you want a certificate for this webinar. So till we meet again on the 24th of February 2022 for another exciting edition of the IEPA-UCC webinar series, championed by our cherished Director General, Dr. Michael Boachila. Please keep safe, for COVID is still real. Thank you and bye-bye.
Okay.
Oprah.
Bye.